Hey guys, we are going to talk about the biosphere today, which involves matter and energy and the interdependence in nature. And all of this information is found in Chapter 3 of your textbook if you need to reference any further information. Now we'll start with Section 1, which basically outlines what ecology is. It is the scientific study of interactions among organisms and between organisms and their physical environment. How does each impact the other? So we could basically say that ecology is the study of our living planet. We consider all life on Earth and all parts of the Earth that life exists as the biosphere. So this includes land, water, atmosphere. The biosphere actually extends 8 kilometers above the Earth's surface all the way to as far as 11 kilometers below the surface of the ocean. Now, ecologists study organisms and their environment. And they'll usually choose to focus on a particular level of organization because it'd be almost impossible for an ecologist to study the entire biosphere all at one time. It'd just be too much. So the different levels from smallest to largest include species, which is just an individual organism. Then population is a group of individuals of the same species in a given area. You have communities. This includes several different populations in a defined area. You have an ecosystem, so that is all the organisms that live in a place, normally multiple communities, and together with their physical environment as well. And then you have biomes. That's a group of ecosystems that share climates and typical types of organisms. And beyond the biome, then you get back into the biosphere. So an ecologist generally chooses a particular a level of study. We're not going to take on the whole thing. Now, it's important when you're studying different levels of organization, and you need to know what biotic factors and abiotic factors are because they all affect the environment in a different way. Biotic factors are the living parts of the environment, okay, and these are things that an organism could interact with. And abiotic factors are also things that organisms might interact with, but they are the non-living parts of the environment. And in this picture here, the examples over here are examples of biotic factors: bumblebees, rabbits, trees, any kinds of plants. So these are all living things, so they're called biotic factors. Non-examples over here are actually your abiotic factors: sunlight, weather, rocks. Those are all non-living things. They are considered abiotic factors, but organisms interact with both biotic and abiotic factors and affect them as well as the environment can affect the living organisms. Alright, moving on to section 2 of chapter 3, we're going to talk about energy, producers, and consumers. We'll start off with the primary producers, and before we get into what those actually are, you need to remember that organisms need energy for growth, reproduction, and their own metabolic processes. So if we have no energy, there's no life functions, therefore there is no life. Now, sunlight is our ultimate energy source, and anything that can capture energy from sunlight is known as an autotroph. And plants are pretty much the main living organism that we talk about using sunlight to capture energy. Hopefully you remember that process is photosynthesis, but algae and other bacteria are also autotrophs. Now, being an autotroph also makes plants our primary producers. This is because they are the first producers of energy-rich compounds that are later used by other organisms. So they're the ones capturing that sunlight, putting it into usable forms for all the other living organisms out there. And you can see over here in this picture, the producers are at the bottom of this ecological pyramid. That is because they are getting that energy directly from the source. They are the first ones, and then from then on out we'll talk about these different levels of consumers. Okay, so like I said, most primary producers harness their energy from sunlight through the process of photosynthesis. Now, there are some ecosystems that do thrive on the deep ocean floors. They harness chemical energy from inorganic molecules. They use a different process to make that energy. It's called chemosynthesis. That process does require light and uses chemical energy to produce carbohydrates. These are mostly different types of bacteria and some algae that are going to produce or use this type of process to get energy. Okay, consumers. These are all different types of organisms that have to ingest something in one way or another to acquire energy. and I'm pretty sure you've probably heard of most of these before. But the general term we give consumers collectively is heterotrophs. And the following are the different types. You have carnivores, they kill and eat other animals. Herbivores, they obtain energy and nutrients by eating plants, leaves, roots, seeds, or fruits. Omnivores are going to do both. Okay, they'll eat some animals and they'll also eat some plants, so they do both. Scavengers, they're animals that consume carcasses of other animals. So usually they're not the ones killing the animal, but they're just getting the leftovers or whatever is hanging around from some other organism's kill. Decomposers, they include bacteria and fungi, like mushrooms, and they feed by chemically breaking down organic matter. And then you have the detritivores. These are organisms that feed on detritus particles. Detritus is just any kind of waste or debris. Probably the most common organism that is a detritivore for you would probably be the earthworm. Now I have a picture over here of a bear, and you can see that he has a fish in his mouth. Now bears are opportunistic eaters. They're going to get and eat whatever they can find. So they're actually considered omnivores because they'll eat berries, vegetation, insects, fish, as you can see there, sometimes other small mammals. They kind of just whatever they can get their hands on. And, a lot of animals are considered certain types of consumers, but they're not defined by that. They will, some animals will just get what they can get and sometimes eat things that they wouldn't usually on a regular basis. Okay, 3.3. So section 3 of chapter 3 talks about energy flow in ecosystems. It's very important to understand that energy flows through an ecosystem in a one-way stream. And that's from primary producers that capture that energy from sunlight to the various consumers that take that energy in or ingest that food. So energy passes through an ecosystem along a food chain. A food chain is just a series of steps in which organisms transfer energy by eating or being eaten. Now, generally speaking, you're not just going to have a simple food chain in an ecosystem. You have a more complex network of feeding interactions known as a food web. This just includes many food chains. And a food web more accurately displays the feeding relationships in an entire ecosystem. As you can see over here, this is just an example of a very simple food web. You can pick along here an individual food chain, like this grasshopper and the flowers, and then this bird eats that grasshopper. So that is one little simple food chain within this entire food web. Okay, then there are trophic levels and ecological pyramids that we've talked a little bit about in class already. But basically what a trophic level is, it's each step in a food chain or a food web. And remember I said that primary producers always make up this first level. And they're getting that energy directly from sunlight. A primary consumer then is something that directly eats the producers. Okay? And then you have a secondary consumer, which eats the primary consumer, who ate the primary producers. And then you have tertiary consumers, which eats the secondary consumer, and so on and so on. So these are all different trophic levels. An ecological pyramid then will show the relative amount of energy or matter contained within those trophic levels and in a given food chain or food web. And I'm going to show you a couple different types of ecological pyramids. This is a pyramid of energy. It is showing you how energy is passed on from the primary producers to each consumer level. And notice that when you start at the primary producer level, you get 100% of energy there because they're capturing the energy directly from sunlight. And the first level consumer though is only getting 10% of that energy stored within itself. And then that second level consumer is getting 1% of that. The third level consumer is getting 0.1%. So every time it's only gaining 10% of what it's eating, depending on that trophic level. Notice off here at every trophic level, the excess energy is getting released as heat. So you will notice that as you go up in the trophic levels, there are less and less organisms because they need more energy to survive, so there's usually less of them around in an ecosystem. Here is your pyramid of biomass, which is usually very similar to a pyramid of numbers. So you can kind of consider this one both in this case, because a pyramid of biomass is a general amount of matter within an ecosystem, And then a pyramid of numbers is basically the general amount of that individual in that area. And they tend to be interrelated. So there's generally more producers in an ecosystem, which would mean there would be more matter. Same thing here, you go to that primary consumer. However much matter there is, okay, usually corresponds with the number of them. And notice again, when you get up to the top of the pyramid, less energy available. They have to consume more organisms. Therefore, there's a lot more competition at that level. You don't see as many of them in that same ecosystem. All right, last section we're going to briefly talk about is 3-4 cycles of matter. We kind of have to go back and remember that all living things are composed of mostly 4 elements: oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen. This was everybody's favorite chapter, chapter 2, biochemistry. We learned about carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. But where did all these essential elements actually come from? Well, we need to know that matter moves through the biosphere differently than the way energy moves. It is actually recycled within and between those ecosystems. And those essential elements that we mentioned, they're passed on from one organism to another, and also among parts of the biosphere through closed loops known as biogeochemical cycles. Now this diagram over here shows you that nutrients are recycled through the biogeochemical cycles, or cycles of matter, but they are powered by the one-way flow of energy. And that's what this kind of the visualization is trying to show you. We have energy passing through, but notice it's not being recycled, it's being used up, but it powers that recycling of matter that continues to flow through the biosphere. All right, so these biogeochemical cycles have different types of processes that occur. They could be biological processes, geological processes that can involve, volcanic eruptions, different weather patterns. We also have chemical and physical processes, and then human activity, which we're very well aware of since it's things that we do, burn fossil fuels. That involves us driving our cars. Burning down forest areas releases carbon dioxide into the air as well. So these are all different processes that go into those biogeochemical processes that we're going to get into more in class. So the cycles that we're going to be discussing in detail in class are the water cycle, and then these nutrient cycles: carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So I'm not going to get into detail here because we'll kind of work on this in class, and a lot of this is probably somewhat familiar to you. But do know, and I have this starred, that nutrient limitation does play a huge role in the primary productivity, or the rate at which primary producers can create organic material within an ecosystem. So when we start investigating some of these cycles, that nutrient that the supply limits the productivity is called a limiting nutrient, and that's going to be a key word for you to remember. All right, and that is basically the gist of Chapter 3. We'll get into more details in class. Please feel free to go back, watch this again, pause it at any time you need to. Please be working on trying to use the Cornell note-taking method. Like I said, I will be starting to score those notes, and I'll give you some more practice time, but be thinking about that and trying to work on that. Have a good day.